Hi, awesome Calm 151 students. It's Professor Lucido again here with you. We're going to talk about convergence today. And convergence is a word that doesn't mean as much as it used to, or has a different connotation today than it did 10 or 20 years ago, which is weird for me to talk about because I was involved with convergent media for a good part of my career when I worked both in public television and when I worked for an NBC affiliate. And even when I worked for the San Francisco Giants baseball team. But to oversimplify it, because I want to do that as a starting point here, think of two forks of a river converging. And they call it a confluence. Good visual, right? The North Fork, the South Fork of the Platte River coming together. That's a good word picture for what the word convergence meant to journalism, to the news print media. When I was a young man, newspapers were printed in paper and they were sent via a paper boy, to your house, and it ended up on your doorstep in the morning or in the afternoon. Or even my parents, when I was a little guy, had both the morning and the afternoon paper. And since then, and I want to say really maybe in the late 90s, but certainly by the year 2000, 2004, 5, right in that range, most major American newspapers had to supply news, provide news along with its regular print the paper and get it out to people's residences or into newsstands. They had to also have a website, and they had to have digital versions of their stories. And then soon in the mid 2000s, sound, pictures, videos. And so if you think of the New York Times or the Denver Post or any major American newspaper, now they're far less print the paper and get it to your house than they are a media news outlet based on their podcasts, videos, their website, and sometimes subscription access to their PDF files of their stories. So convergence really meant had to do with resilience and flexibility, but that a media outlet had to not only do their traditional radio, television, newspaper thing they've been doing for many decades, they also had to have a website, have some social media, and put out content digitally, not in an analog way. So that's the basis for this idea of convergence. This is the reading you had, Convergence, ? I Diverge. And from 2001, June of 2001, Henry Jenkins. And Henry Jenkins, I give you a little bio of him there, but basically he's a media scholar at the University of Southern California. And I guess kind of a big deal, has done quite a bit of writing. They have a major, important public discourse program there in the School of Communication and Journalism. And he's a heavy hitter in terms of media literacy, media studies, and certainly in terms of convergence and confluence of media. So we're going to watch these two videos. I think I'll play them back to back, and then we'll talk right after.
Recognize this guy? That's a young Jeff Greenfield, who was Sunday morning's very first media critic. And my, what he and you and I have seen in the years since.
When Sunday Morning marked its 25th anniversary, I was invited back to survey how the media landscape had changed. When this broadcast was born, I noted there was no cable news, no abundance of cable channels, no C-SPAN. Reasonably big changes, sure, but what has happened in the last 5 years can't even be captured by the word change. It is as if the most fundamental laws of the media universe have been utterly overthrown. Sure, some changes count as more of the same. The big three networks, which divided 90% of the primetime audience 30 years ago, now divide about 30%. But they are still the dominant players in prime time. And the major alternatives, basic cable like Lifetime, ESPN for sports, HBO for pay cable alternatives, are thriving. But where the last 5 years have brought a revolution is in how information and entertainment are delivered, and where. 5 years ago, MySpace was the barest glimmer of an idea for a social networking site in Los Angeles. It's now a worldwide presence with well over 120 million visitors a month. Facebook didn't even exist 5 years ago. It now draws more than 200 million visitors. Ask anyone about YouTube before 2005, they'd have thought you were talking about an ointment. By last fall, YouTube was drawing 100 million viewers a month, and every minute, 10 hours of video are posted, ranging from news, sports, and entertainment clips to original creations. If you want to see what Mentos and Diet Coke can create in combination, YouTube provides the answer, dozens of them. Well, okay, just more sources of media, right? Wrong. What these and countless other examples represent is a sea change that has upended all of our assumptions about how media are delivered. Today, everything we see and hear and read is digitized, a product of those countless ones and zeros. And that in turn means that as far as technology is concerned, it's all the same. Print, audio, video, no difference. So what? Here's what. Once upon a time, say when Sunday morning was born, every kind of information came in a different form. If you read mail, it came in an envelope. If you wanted to listen to news, you had to buy a radio. If you wanted to play music at home, you needed a turntable and records. You wanted to read a newspaper, you needed to buy the paper. A movie, that was a trip to the theater, or maybe the VCR. A phone call away from home, you had to find a payphone. Write a report, get a typewriter and paper, and then find a copier and a mailbox to send it around. Now, to use the buzzword, convergence is here. Every conceivable kind of information in the broadest sense, comes to us on the same device. This is a newspaper, a TV screen, a camera, a theater, a file cabinet, a radio, a Walkman, a Yellow Pages, an edit room, a travel agency. And at root, this revolution has shifted massive amounts of power away from the providers to the users of information. You don't want to watch a program when it's on? Hey, it's always on somewhere. You like one song, but you don't want to buy an album? iTunes will oblige you. You don't want to buy a newspaper? Read it for free online. One reason why newspapers as we know them may not be around much longer. Which raises this heretical thought. Whether on a TV screen, or computer, or cell phone, or toaster, the fundamental things still apply, or should. A love of storytelling, a love of clear, vivid language, a respect for history. The world did not start 5 years ago, even if YouTube did. These still matter most, which may be one big reason why 30 years on, this broadcast endures.
My grad students were interviewing high school age students around the world. In almost every case, what we heard was that young people had a richer intellectual and creative life outside of school than inside it. That the things they learned from, the things they cared about, were things they did after the school day was over. Participatory culture describes a world where everyone participates, that where we take media in our own hands, where we have the capacity often to produce media, share media. I trace participatory culture back to the middle of the 19th century when there was a Tory printing press movement and high school age kids were producing publications, hand-laying type down and sending them across a national network. So the Amateur Press Association in the 19th century paved the way for science fiction fandom in the 20th century, for radio, amateur radio and ham radio, down through the zine movements around Riot Girls and punk rock, the indie movement around Seattle and the World Trade Organization, down to the rise of digital media. So there's a whole trajectory of examples where communities began to produce media to share ideas among themselves and where they follow some of the practices we might associate with a folk culture. In a folk culture, media is produced not to make money. People produce media to share it with each other. When someone makes a quilt, as my grandmother used to make, people gather together. There's no expert. People are learning from each other. Skills get passed from someone who knows a little more to someone who knows a little less. It's a social mode of production. It's a gift, typically, that the quilt is given. Until fairly recently, it was not sold. It was passed on to a member of the community as the community acknowledged a ritual in their life. If we think about media on the internet, it does many of those things, right? The fan communities I've spent much of my career studying write stories not because they want to get in the industry or they want to make money, but because they love telling stories and they want to tell stories to each other. If we think about YouTube, many of the people on YouTube are producing media because there's something they vitally want to share. It might be a skateboarder who did a great stunt and had their friends record it and paste it online. It might be an amateur remix artist who saw a TV show they loved and set it to music. It could be a political commentator or someone doing a video blog to talk about their everyday life. All of that becomes part of what I'm describing as a participatory culture. The question is really, well, how do we go from participating in our culture to participating in our political and civic structures? If we look at, for example, the young people who made videos in support of the Obama campaign a year or so back, how many of them got their start making movies of themselves skateboarding or making fan films or whatever? They acquired their skill by simply playing around with media. In the terms of the Digital Youth Project, messing around becomes they were involved in messing around the technology, geeking out around a certain set of subject matter. So what I'm interested in right now is what would it mean to geek out for democracy? What does it mean to be as passionate about the future of your society as you are about anime, about games, about the sort of forms of popular culture that young people are involved with? We could also point to, for example, the Harry Potter Alliance. And the Harry Potter Alliance is a group that organizes around human rights issues around the world. So Andrew Slack, the 20-something-year-old leader of the group, said when he read Harry Potter, what he saw was a story of a young man who recognized evil in his society. The government was covering up, the mass media of his time was lying about it, but he saw through it, organized his classmates to form Dumbledore's army, and went out and changed the world. And that's his account of the plot of Harry Potter. And he said, well, what if we had a Dumbledore's army in our world? What issues would it tackle? What are the concerns? What would you do? And uses that fantasy of Dumbledore's army to mobilize. Now 100,000 young people around the world are involved in the Harry Potter Alliance, and they're going out to deal with human rights violations in the third world, Darfur, Uganda, workers' rights issues in the United States around Walmart, gay marriage propositions in Maine and California they've mobilized on. They just raised a cargo plane worth of supplies for Haiti. So they work on a range of issues. So the people who are involved in that are not the kids who joined student government. They're the kids who were, playing Dungeons and Dragons, the kids who, were collecting monster magazines, the kids who read a lot of science fiction books. They're suddenly finding a vehicle to think politically through these kinds of interest-driven networks. And we're seeing again and again, these interest-driven networks are preparing the way for them to think of themselves as citizens in a new way, to mobilize the skills they developed as contributing to online communities and participatory culture and direct them toward changing society, changing the world. I mean, I'm deeply enthusiastic about all of the stuff that's taking place outside of school, but if we leave it there as sort of, we create feral children of the internet, and the idea that just let them be, they'll learn on their own, I think leaves a lot of kids behind. And it leaves those kids without adult guidance, without engagement and validation of those skills that would prepare them to move up to higher levels and to get recognition for what they've accomplished. They don't need us snooping over their shoulders, but they do need us watching their backs. What I'm seeing is there are individual teachers out there who are incredibly innovative, dedicated, willing to explore things, willing to think in open-minded ways about the future of education. And those are the battles that are worth fighting for at this point. School systems, are locked down. Federal policy makes it difficult to change. They may be in schools where all of the affordances of participatory culture are locked out. What's important is to figure out how to bring that into the educational process. So, for example, with Moby Dick, we had students make changes in the Wikipedia entries around Melville and Moby Dick, and defend those changes against challenge through the vetting process on Wikipedia, and to have some of their changes stand the test of the community, and have to mobilize evidence and support arguments and demonstrate the value of the arguments they made on something that would be a permanent part of the public record and the public conversation around these books. And the sense of empowerment those kids got by participating in that process is really vital. But to think of all the schools who say, Wikipedia is bad, let's not let that in our classroom, that's the experience that so many kids in America have. In the short term, it's about getting this stuff in the hands of teachers who will want to make a difference and giving them the validation and encouragement they need to keep fighting the good fight on behalf of the new media literacies.
So you heard from the media analyst on CBS Sunday Morning from 2009, which seemed very antiquated, but that was just 2 years after the iPhone came out. And again, roughly 5 years after YouTube and something like that, same amount of time after Facebook was started. But that was a good indication of what the word convergence meant 11 or so years ago. And then you heard from Henry Jenkins on participatory culture from 2013, which would have been 12 years since he wrote the article that you read for this unit, Convergence, I Diverge. Henry Jenkins' remarks on participatory culture are important. Pay attention to that concept. That's something we're all doing when we rate a product, when we like or share something on one of our social media accounts. And it goes way, way beyond that. He was talking about political activism. I'm thinking of 12, 13, 15, whenever the Arab Spring was. I can't remember the year right now, but and the fact that people in the Middle East were having unrest in Libya and Egypt and other countries, not happy with their leaders and so on, and strifing between the different factions of the Muslim faith. And they were able to communicate via Twitter and Facebook and so on. And without that kind of communication and interactivity with each other and with media and with government online through these social media apps, the Arab Spring would never happen, and political activism wouldn't be as sort of possible as it is now, I should say. So that concept of participatory culture is a direct result of convergent media, news, broadcast journalism, and straight up video, pictures, and audio converging for storytelling and for active, activity, if you will, political action and so on. An important time in our culture. Here's some of the points from Jenkins' article, directly from the article. Media convergence is an ongoing process, right? We will develop new skills for managing information, new structures for transmitting information across channels. We are doing that. He wrote the article in 2001. We're doing these things now and have been doing them for a handful of years. In a way, Jenkins was, forecasting the future when he wrote that article. History tells us that old media never die. Remember our unit on radio and how radio is still important. But compared to the other media channels out there, it's, one of the most antiquated channels there is, other than maybe, literature, right? Or journalism, I guess. But so this idea that old media won't die. No one medium is going to win the battle for our ears and eyeballs. We still have choice in that, and we meander from Hulu to Amazon Prime, to Netflix, to the New York Times website, to a podcast, to our Spotify playlist for the day, and so forth and so on, right? No one wins. Their television isn't the winner by far, right? That's a fascinating prediction that he made. He lists a whole bunch of kinds of convergence, channels, if you will, or sort of blocks, I think, as he has it in the article. He talks about technological convergence and so on. He talks very much about economic convergence. I'm thinking with COVID-19, we're seeing some of these things happen at a very high level because they have to, both technological and economic, in terms of finding a vaccine and transmitting information related to the virus across countries, across continents, across oceans, right? He talked about social or organic convergence, consumers multitasking strategies for navigating the new information system. We're seeing that in our buying habits. We're seeing that with apps for our phones. We're seeing that with services for groceries, for Amazon grocery, Whole Foods, those sorts of things. Being able to get the shopping list from your grandma that lives on the other side of town, go get the stuff, have it sent, or have it picked up at the store, and then you go have it selected, I should say, from the store, and then you go pick it up and take it to grandma. I'm just thinking of that as kind of this idea of social and organic convergence. Cultural convergence. Hello. This country is struggling with its welcoming or unwelcoming nature to immigrants and so on, right? The idea that cultures are converging is huge, and a huge part of our experience as people living on the planet in 2020, and media convergence is a big part of that. He also talked about global convergence, the cultural hybridity that results from the international circulation of media content, webinars, right? Speakers across continents, energy and focus and study groups and think tanks and task forces across continents. Here is a clip from The Guardian, and I'm going to play this for you, and then we'll talk just a little bit on the other side.
We're starting to ask questions to more than just our people about innovation and how do you create step change ideas. So to me, it's all about collaboration. And so I don't think anybody can get there without that. We need collaboration around energy. We need collaboration around every part of our processes.
Environmentalism isn't a profession. It isn't a specialty. Environmentalism is simply a way of seeing the world. We need garage mechanics. We need artists and musicians and teachers and lawyers and doctors. All of them have to see the world in that different way. So when we begin to broaden the tent out and work together to eliminate those things that prevent us from focusing on a truly sustainable world, then I think we've got a very, very big tent.
Some of the optimists in the space talk about an era of convergence where new technologies, new business models, completely different sectors that have often in the past been separate, transport, buildings, energy supply and so on, start to hybridize, come together in some quite different formats. I think that's one of the really exciting elements in terms of looking out at a truly 21st century economy, where the barriers, the silos start to break down.
One of the encouraging developments of the last few years was the growth in democracy, citizen participation, and transparency. Technologies of participation and transparency open the door to collaboration amongst peoples at all levels, in the community, regionally, nationally, and so on.
One thing business can probably do is to look across a particular sector, and if the leaders in that sector can come together and voluntarily agree on common goals and common objectives, it is feasible to have an impact.
Many of the big successes, whether you look at sustainable fishery, Forest Stewardship Council, voluntary principles for security and human rights, Kimberley process, they're all products of these alliances which have not said let's solve sustainability at large, but let's address this one particular problem. And they've managed to get together a bunch of people who are prepared to apply the thought necessary, and they actually solve the problem, I think.
What people around the world would like to see is that the leaders, our heads of state, our heads of government, come together in Rio and project a sense of common responsibility, a shared vision, and shared objectives.
The world of today demands complementarity and partnership.
In the video, we saw a bunch of men, CEO, foundation people, sustainability experts, security general of the Brundtland Commission. I have no idea what that is. The co-chair of Infosys Technologies, Sir Mark, so royalty, Sir Mark Moody Stewart, chair of BASD 2012, Achim Steiner, right? And then finally, we meet this woman, Yolanda Kappa-Badze. And she is a star. She was a part of or president of the World Wildlife Fund. She's from Ecuador and was a government minister of environment. And I have a clip of her talking, but before I move to that and show it for you, I wanted you to think about this idea of convergence. And the speakers you just saw were really talking about a convergence of talent, intellect, a convergence of like-minded goals, in this case for sustainability and for environmental issues. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 men and 1 woman. And I found that a little bit offensive. The video was from the Guardian of London. And so, and it was from 2012. So understandably, a little bit outdated, 8 years in the rearview mirror. But important for us and for me to recognize that she may have been the most important contributor to the video, given that she is a woman and she is from a Latin American country and serving her government and was once president of the World Wildlife Fund. So let's watch this video from Yolanda Kappa-Badze, if I can say her name correctly. She's talking at a big convention, Eat Stockholm Food Forum, EAT. Let's watch.
Thank you. I'm wearing 2 hats, WWF, the pandas, and Champions 1, 2, 3, that you have already heard about during this forum. When I was Minister of the Environment, together with the Minister of Health, we decided to launch a joint program. And the program was related to the quality of water of the rivers in Ecuador. And we did this because too many children were dying or were sick because of contaminated water. But this came with a message. And the message was, we don't need more hospitals in Ecuador. We need more healthy people. And it clicked. It clicked immediately, and people started contributing to the quality of water in Ecuador. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because there is no way to separate the health of the environment with the health of people. I'm glad that Professor Krebs was speaking just ahead of me, because health of the environment is immediately related to health of humanity. Why is a panda interested in the EAT Forum? There are several pandas in this group, and we are interested because food is an ecological challenge. The production and the consumption of food are ecological challenges. Food impacts the main interests of WWF. Let's look into some scientific evidence. Forests. Expansion of agriculture is the #1 cause of deforestation, whether it is in the Amazon because of the production of soy, or in Southeast Asia because of the production of palm oil. Fresh water. 70% of fresh water is used in agriculture. And let's not forget about the pollution of chemicals of agriculture in water. Oceans, coral reefs. I'm so glad the Crown Princess Victoria yesterday spoke in defense of the oceans. 50% of the coral reefs have disappeared already. 50%. And the next 50% might disappear by 2050 if we don't do something about that. And coral reefs are the nests of life of oceans. Wildlife and biodiversity in general, 70 appears to be a magic number. 70% of biodiversity loss is due to food production. We are killing the chicken of the golden eggs. And then climate. Climate change. We all heard yesterday from one of the speakers that if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest emitter of CO2. That's crazy. And unacceptable, of course. And then 40% of land, of terrestrial land area, is transformed to agriculture. In summary, WWF is responding to climate change and to the loss of nature. To address all these challenges about forests, about oceans, about water, about biodiversity, we need experts. We use them well, and we collaborate with several research centers. But to deal with food, we are all experts. We know what we like to eat. We know what we don't want to eat. We know when to eat, how much to eat, and what sort of food we like. And being all experts, there is no reason why we shouldn't all act. Yesterday, in one of the panels, culture was mentioned. The importance of culture, that very often we cannot really break through changes in behavior. Sometimes you can. A couple of years ago, the president of China, Xi Jinping, ruled top down, as it happens in China, that no shark fin soup would be served in any banquet of the government. In 24 hours, it happened. So sometimes you can break through. Culture can be managed if there is a sound and solid argument that make behaviors change. And in South Korea, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, we already have restaurants that say no shark fin soup is served in this restaurant. And that is great. That is great because little steps become big messages and become highly relevant to a culture. What we still have not managed to do enough is related to animal feed. There are still places, and I don't know whether you have experienced this, where you are served eggs that taste like chicken. Have you? I have. Who in this room, no, probably everybody in this room remembers the mad cow episode. It was because of what we were feeding cows with. And we feed chicken with fish powder. Maybe we are going to live through an experience of a mad chicken episode. I have never seen a chicken walking in the beach looking for fish. And we give them to eat fish. But what is of concern is that we don't react to reason and facts. We only react when the crisis comes, when we are hit by an event, by an episode that really creates concern around health and the lifestyle. WWF is related to every single SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, and to all the Aichi biodiversity targets. We haven't mentioned them in this forum, but they are equally important because we are talking about saving nature. And we are fully aware that whatever we do or we don't affects our quality of life and affect the security of humanity. But we cannot do it alone. WWF on its own, even though we are 1 million members around the world, we can't change the world on our own. Partnerships are a must. And we need to face key drivers, react against destructive pressures, and meet unprecedented opportunities with others. WWF works with governments, works with the private sector, and works with citizens on different fronts. And we recognize the importance of changing public policies up here, changing behaviors within the market, and changing behaviors of the consumers. But these sectors, the government, national or local, and the private sector can take decisions that that have an impact on lots, millions of people. But the changes take a long time to happen. While if you work with civil society groups, directly with a citizen, change happens in seconds by pushing a button in your computer. Look at Avast or look at other systems that we have today that mobilize society. And that is what we are trying to do, influencing large populations as much as the decision makers at the top. Raising awareness for us is absolutely essential, or we cannot guarantee action. We need to build awareness about the links between what we eat, how we behave, and the survival of the polar bear, the extinction of coral reefs, the threats to tropical forests, and the risks to humans. WWF makes a call from the Earth's oceans, forests, pandas, and ice bears. The food we eat connects us to them and to their landscape. Thank you.
That was Yolanda Kakabadze. Impressive. If ever there were a time to think about convergence of ideas, of technologies, economies, cultures, it would be this time where the world has been shown to be so small, and this little virus, not much littler than a cell or two or whatever it is, right, can impact the planet so much. So some notes again from Jenkins as I wrap up here. The digital resistance will be the best of times and the worst of times, but a new cultural order will emerge from it. Stay tuned. I should have said the digital renaissance, although I think the digital resistance is relatively apropos or on point as well. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and say thanks for staying tuned in, and I'll see you again soon on another one of my voiceover lectures. Bye.